Hey guys, so for quick tip number 3, I wanted to talk a little bit about white balance and why it's important and why most people don't use it or are afraid to use it or don't realize they should be using it, I guess. Now, white balance is an interesting thing. Let's start out with what is white balance. Basically, white balance is a way for your camera to adjust to the temperature of the pictures you're taking. Now, when we look with our eyes, when we look like at a white piece of paper, any white piece of paper, right? If we look at it outside, our eyes will adjust to it, and our brains will tell us it's white, right? So we know it's white. If we look at it inside, where it's like really warm, yellowy lights, our brain still sees that paper as white. Even though there's a lot of orange in there, our eyes adjust to it, and we still see it as white. If we're under fluorescent lights, our eyes adjust to it, and we see it as white. So the concept of having to adjust for white balance is a little foreign to us as humans because we don't have to do it. Our eyes do it automatically, and we never even think about it. It's just one of those things that we know our eyes are amazing, right? Our eyes, by the way, are 10 times better than any camera, faster, sharper, blah, 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 right? Now, so white balance. Now, I shoot raw. Out of my camera, I shoot everything raw, and what that does is it gives me a picture that has all the information in it, so I can, in post-processing, select the appropriate white balance that I think it should have been. So like if I was out in the daylight, I could set it to daylight and it would give me more or less the correct white balance. And now white balance, just basically what it's trying to do is it's making your grays gray. You know, like if you have like a white to black scale with all the grays in it, right, you can have a warm gray, you can have a cool gray, and you can have just the most basic gray you can get, like the most lack of color, just black and white. And that's what white balance is trying to do. It's trying to find the perfect temperature, whether it's warmer, cooler, bluer, yellower, and trying to get that white to be perfectly white, all that gray to be perfectly gray. Now, since I shoot raw, I can do this in post-processing. It's super easy. I can just switch it, and I'll show you all of this later on in this video. But if you're shooting JPEG, this is where it's important to set it in your camera. I'm not saying it's not important in the raw files, because you will be setting it. You just be setting it in post-processing, so your eyes will be able to see it. But if you're shooting JPEG on your camera, and almost all digital cameras, whether they're point and shoot, whether they're DSLRs, whether they're mirrorless cameras, even the iPhone, if you get the appropriate apps, have white balance adjustments. I use Camera Plus. It's kind of like my favorite little camera app for the iPhone. So I'm just going to kind of go over which white. I have a Canon 60D, so I'm going to be showing you kind of the menu that I have to select my white balances. And most cameras have a very similar. Maybe they don't have as many, maybe they have more, but they have very similar ones. So let me just kind of show you what I'm talking about. So I took a picture of my camera, and this is the white balance menu in my camera. So I have settings. I have auto white balance. What does auto do? Auto lets the camera try to figure out what the perfect white balance is for a scene. And you know what? In most cameras, it works pretty good. And you know, you may never need to get out of auto, but I recommend at least trying all the other white balance, because you never know. You might like I know that I have a friend who does a lot of street photography and outside photography, and he always has it set to shade, no matter what. I mean, he has it set to shade. If he needs to switch it, he'll switch it out of shade, but he has it set to shade all the time. Why? Because he takes a lot of street portraits and a lot of people, and shade is kind of it warms up your image. And why does it do that? Because, and let me explain actually each one. So auto white balance will try to find whatever gray is by itself. Daylight assumes that you're shooting with the sun. So now the sun has a certain temperature. Actually, the sun is pretty white light, right? So the sun, if you put a white piece of paper up to the sun, it's actually going to be pretty white. There's not going to be too much of an orange or a blue hint to it, unless you're getting a lot of reflections bouncing off. But usually it'll be pretty white. So daylight ends up giving you a pretty normal looking picture, because it's adjusting, but not too much. Shade. What is shade doing? Well, if you're shooting in the shade, under trees, under buildings, under whatever, that shade has a very cold light in it. If you ever really, we learned way back in the day in painting class that when you're painting shade, you never paint it black, right? You add purples and you add blues, and even though it's really dark, there's a lot of really blue, cold colors. And what shade does is it actually will try to warm up your image to adjust for the cool colors in the actual scene. Now, granted, if you're not in the shade, let's say you are in the sun and you put it to shade, well, it's still trying to warm up your image, so your image is going to look really, really orange, which is something you might want. But just know that all of these are very specific. It's trying to do something because you're telling it that you're in a certain type of light. Cloudy. Now, cloudy assumes that the sun is covered by clouds, and so it's not quite as warm. I mean, it's not quite as cold as shade, but it's colder than, say, regular daylight. It's got a bit of a blue hint because the clouds are reflecting, say, the water, so they're kind of blue, and they are casting a bluer light. So again, it's trying to warm up your image. Not as much as shade, but it is trying to warm up your image. Okay, so now tungsten. Tungsten is a very interesting one because if you set your camera to tungsten and you start taking pictures outside, all your shots will look blue, right? They'll look blue. You'll have like avatar looking people. Why is that? Well, it's because it's assuming that you are indoors. You're in this kind of light. If you look at me right now, I'm like really orange, right? Why? Because I'm in tungsten lighting and my video camera is not adjusting for it. Well, you can set your camera to adjust for it, and what tungsten does, it actually shoots the blues way up. So it cools down your picture to adjust for the orange, yellow light of the tungsten lights that we have, kind of indoor lighting, candle light, kind of that stuff. Okay, so fluorescent. Fluorescent's kind of sort of the opposite. Fluorescent lights, when we're talking about indoor fluorescence, they're very white light, very cool light, so it'll adjust for that as well. Flash is a very white light, so it's actually very much like daylight, except it's, whiter and harsher, so it'll adjust for that. My camera has these other two, which is custom and temp. Custom is that you can set a custom white balance. So like you can buy these white balance cards basically, and what it does, it has all the colors in there and it has all the grays, and basically you could take a picture with your camera and you can tell your camera, this is perfect gray, this is, red, this is thing, and it'll create a custom profile for wherever you're shooting at. Studio photographers use that a lot, if they're bouncing stuff off and they're trying to get that color perfect. I don't use it very much because I don't do much studio work. I do mostly outdoor work, and again, I shoot raw, so I can change it myself. And temp, my camera lets me set it by temperature, so I can set it to 5,000 degrees, 10,000, whatever. And you'll start to notice that like daylight is a certain temperature and shade is a certain temperature, and so that's kind of what I have on my camera. Now, let me kind of show you what each one of these does, and I'm going to go into Lightroom for that. Okay, so this is a picture I took at Occupy LA, actually. I just went down there and take some pictures of people. And this is a girl that was listening to somebody talk, and the day was kind of cloudy, I guess you could say. I mean, there was sunshine, but there was trees and there was clouds, and it was downtown LA, so there was building cover, but the sun was actually hitting us. But it was a cloudy day, so now I shoot in RAW, so it just gives me the absolute raw file. It is a flat file. It doesn't add any contrast. It doesn't add anything that your camera does when you're shooting JPEG. It burns it in, right? So I have to do all that in post-processing because I shoot RAW. But what I wanted to show you is the white balance, which is right here. All right, so this is how it was shot. It just shot it. It was cloudy. This is giving me just the raw data. If I put it on auto, right? So we talked about auto is the camera trying to adjust for the white balance. So what did it do? It actually warmed it up quite a bit. It actually did a pretty good job of what the scene looked like. You know, it looks good. I mean, the whites kind of look white to me. It's got a little bit of blue. It might have been a little warmer than this. So if we go to daylight, remember daylight is adjusting for the sun. So there was a slight change, but it added some magenta and it put the temperature at 55 degrees, which is kind of what daylight is temperature-wise. But it added some magenta in it, and it actually looks relatively good. I don't think we were in daylight. I think we were in cloud. That's why it feels a little cold. But watch what happens when I start to get into the cloudy. See, it warmed it up just a little bit. Like I told you, when there's cloud cover, the images are, the light is a little colder. So when you adjust for it in your camera by putting it to cloudy, it warms it up, which is what it did here. Which is probably, we were shooting in cloudy. I was shooting in cloudy. So this is probably what the scene really kind of looked like. And it's kind of hard to explain because your eyes don't see it that way, right? So, but this is probably the closest we were going to get to the actual scene. Now, that doesn't mean that that's where you need to be. You can adjust your pictures to whatever you want. If I want to, I mean, actually, let me show you where I ended up doing with this picture. I'm just going to show you the end result that I did with this picture so that you can see that it doesn't have to be exactly what the camera tells you. I actually decided to go there. I mean, I went really, 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 really warm. Why? I don't know. I liked it. I like warm, and it felt like it was kind of a cool way of doing it. That's just kind of an artistic image, you know? It's like there's no right or wrong with these images. Some of them are more pleasant, some of them are less pleasant. We see what we like. I went really warm with this shot because she was pretty, and it just felt like it should be warm to me. Okay, so let me go back to the image. Okay, so this is what it would have been if I shot it in cloudy. Now, remember, all of these things that I'm switching up, if you were to put those in your camera and you were shooting JPEG, it would burn the image, or it would save the image as a JPEG with this kind of color, right? Now, since I'm shooting RAW, I have the power to change that as much as I want, so I always recommend shooting RAW if you can. If you can't, try to get your white balance close to what you're actually shooting. And I know it's a lot of work because you got to switch it and all that stuff, and auto is so easy, but look at the difference between auto and cloudy or shade, right? It's a big difference. Now, let me show you kind of what the other ones are, and they're not going to work because, well, okay, so tungsten, remember I told you tungsten adds a lot of blue because it's supposedly adjusting for this light. Well, since I wasn't in this light, I was in pretty white light from the sun. When I put it in tungsten, it's going to go blue, right? Why? Well, because it's cooling down, because it thinks, because I'm telling it, that I'm shooting in really warm light. So now if I was shooting in really warm light like this, my picture would look really, really orange, kind of like what I do right here on the screen. And so if I set it to tungsten, it would cool it down and it would give me the closest to gray it could get. Same with fluorescent. It's going to be a lot cooler, not as cool as tungsten because fluorescent lights are not as warm as tungsten lights, but they are a little warmer than white light from the sun. And the last one I'm going to go over is flash. Flash is a lot like daylight. Let me show you daylight. See, there's very little difference between flash and daylight, but there is a little bit of a difference. It's got a little less green. But just so you know, that's if you're shooting with flash only, you know, if you're just shooting flash, well, then you could set it to flash. But that's kind of what I have to say about white balance. Basically, try it. If you're burning them into your JPEGs, play with it. You know, if you're on the daylight, switch it to daylight and take your pictures. And if you're indoors, switch it to tungsten and take your pictures. So they don't come out really, I mean, auto does pretty well. So if you're just shooting your child and you're trying to catch him walking or something, don't bother. But if you're taking your time and you want to go take a nice picture and you're out in the woods and you're taking a picture of the city or whatever, try to switch your white balance, especially if you're shooting JPEG. Obviously, if you're shooting RAW, doesn't matter because you're going to change it back. But it is good to know because I like, even when I shoot RAW, I like to try to get my images before I do anything. That's the first thing I do with my images is adjust the white balance. Now, why do I adjust? Because I like starting with the most color balanced image. If I want it to go warm, I'll make it warmer. If I want it to go cold, I will make it cold. I don't want the camera or the computer to tell me what it thinks. I just want it to give me the coolest, or I mean the most perfectly balanced white balance color. Now, another thing you can do is you can also select this tool in Lightroom, and Photoshop, Camera Raw, and most programs have this white balance picker. And what you can do with this is if you know something is white, and this is where if you shot like with the little card that I was telling you about that has all the colors in it and the grays, you could just go in and select that gray and boom, it'll give you your white balance, right? So I'm gonna say that his shirt was pretty white. So if I take this picture and I go there, see it adjusted the white balance to try to make that pick that I selected white, right? So it made that as white as possible, and that adjusted everything else. It made some of the greens back here. It made her kind of warm, which is probably pretty close to where this was shot. It's actually probably pretty close to cloudy or shade. It's actually probably pretty close to shade, right? It's actually warmer than shade, actually quite a bit warmer than shade. But that's kind of what it's thinking. And you know, like, you have to kind of know that it's perfectly white or perfectly gray, because the color picker is really for when you have something that you're absolutely sure. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect. You could take a white piece of paper, put it up to your shot, you know, one time, and then you now, if you're in RAW, you now know that's the first shot has that white card, and now you're shooting everything, so you can select that white card in the first shot and then sync it to all your shots, right? So now all your shots have the correct white balance. Don't get intimidated by white balance. This is a very simple thing. Just try it out. Play with it. You'll get better at it. Now, if you're shooting RAW, it's actually really easy to go through, and it's like, sometimes I'll know I was in daylight and I'll switch it to shade because I want the image to be really warm. Like this one, for example, there's none of them that gave me this warmth, right? None of those that I just showed you gave me this much warmth, but I wanted it to be really warm, so I added warmth, and who cares? Like, there's no right or wrong. I hate it when people tell you that this is the correct way to shoot your pictures. There's no such thing. Pictures are like art. You take your pictures, if you like them, who cares about everybody else? Now, that's if you're doing artistic pictures. If you have a client that you're shooting for, well, you know, listen to your client and try to give him what he wants. But I don't believe there's really, when it comes to processing your images. I mean, obviously, you know, you want your speeds and you want your camera to give you the most perfect representation of what you see. That doesn't necessarily mean it's what's there. It's what you see, right? So that's kind of my, it's not really a rant, but it's my white balance quick tip. Use it. Play with it and try it. All right. See you next time. Please subscribe. Thumbs up if you like the video. Let me know. Have any comments? Let me know what you think. If you have any comments on a quick tip that you would like to hear about, let me know that as well. I got some more coming up. And I hope you're enjoying them. I enjoy making them, and I hope you guys learn a lot, because I learn by making them. So thank you very much, and I will see you next time.